Mara wants to introduce him, or clash him, whatever.
Trashing him. I think maybe not today. Actually, the biggest problem with introducing Chris is limiting his ethical actions so that he'll have time for this talk. Because he has been, obviously at our national level, he's been very involved with the AEU and done a lot of hard work there during some really difficult transition times. Locally, he's huge with the Chatham County Democrats, and I'm not sure how they would go without him. I think that he's pretty important there. And I know that he's absolutely necessary to us because the reason I'm standing here talking on this microphone that's going out to our Zoom audience is really primarily Chris. Plus, he's worked on the website, he's worked on blah this, blah that, and blah the other. You can fill in all these different blanks. But we also know that one of his passions and interest is the environment, which is why I'm really glad that he's giving us his talk today. So please welcome Chris Kaman.
And I do the cat litter too. All right. Oh, my goodness, that is sensitive. Okay. Is the microphone picking me up okay? Okay, all right. I was going to say during joys and concerns that my concern was that I've had a cough and not a sore throat, but just a cough for several days. And I was kept crossing my fingers. Oh, it's going to be okay for Sunday. It's going to be okay for Sunday. So hopefully I won't phase out during the talk. And I've got some cough drops here in case I have to have something to help my throat get me through the talk. So thank you for coming out on a rainy day. I really appreciate it. Here we go. An overview of today's talk. I'm going to say something about Rachel Carson. I'm going to go over the history of Earth Day and some important milestones, go over current challenges and solutions, look at future challenges, and then point specifically what things that you and I can do. So my tribute today is to Rachel Carson. She wrote the book called Silent Spring. It began a critical dialogue about how we treat our environment. It was published in 1962. And one of the famous quotes from Rachel Carson is, "In nature, nothing exists alone." That was also featured in a Netflix show that was recently on, but I won't go down that rabbit hole. The first Earth Day was celebrated on April 22nd, 1970. 20 million Americans came out to demonstrate against the impacts of 150 years of industrial development. And on the right, you see the picture of Earth. This photo here is the first ever Earthrise taken from the moon. It is said that this photo helped galvanize the concern for our planet's health. When you see the beautiful blue and white of the planet, you realize it's really is something special. Progress in the 1970s. From 1970 to 80, great environmental legislations were passed, such as the Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, the Superfund, Toxic Substances Control Act, and the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, and of course the Clean Air and Clean Water Act. The decade also saw the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency and the banning of DDT in the US and of lead in gasoline. Earth Day continued to expand internationally during the 1980s. All right. In 1988, the IPCC was created. That is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's a body of the United Nations, and its job is to advance knowledge about climate change caused by human activities. The World Meteorological Association and the United Nations Environmental Program established it in 1988. The United Nations has endorsed the endorsed the creation of the IPCC later that year. It has a secretariat in Geneva, Switzerland, hosted by the WMO, which I mentioned earlier. It now has 195 member states who govern the IPCC. Earth Day 1990. Earth Day went global in 1990 with over 200 million people in 141 countries. It provided a huge boost to the recycling movement that was just getting started. It also paved the way in 1992 for the United Nations Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. Key development of the conference was the establishment of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC. 3 Cs, established as a part of an international environmental treaty to combat dangerous human interference in the climate system and to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere. It was signed by 154 nations at the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development. And by 2022, the UNFCCC had 198 parties. Its supreme decision-making body, formed in 1995, the Conference of Parties, COP, meets annually to assess dealing with climate change. So then in 1995, the first UNCCC conference was held. It was known as COP 01 because that was the first year of such conferences. And NN refers to the year, not that it was held, but the year since the beginning. So the most recent COP was COP 28 in December of this year. And then in 1997, in the COP3 meeting, the Kyoto Protocol was established, having which is legally binding on developed countries to reduce their greenhouse emissions. So subsequent Earth days and milestones. In 2000, the focus was on global warming and pushing for clean energy. The 5,000 environmental groups worldwide participated, and it was the first use of the internet to publicize Earth Day. In 2006, Al Gore released his documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, about global warming. It was credited with raising awareness of the global warming and re-energizing the environmental movement. In 2010, 1 billion people took action for Earth Day. Climate change was the replacement meme for global warming, because global warming had then become so politicized that climate change seemed a better meme to use. In 2016, the Paris Agreement, aka the Paris Climate Accords, were signed on April 22nd. It was the most significant climate accord in the history of climate and environmental movement. 195 nations ratified the treaty. The goal was to keep the mean global temperature below 2 degrees Celsius, or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, and preferably no more than 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit, Celsius, 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. To stay below the 1.5 Celsius emissions, greenhouse gases would need to be cut by 50% by 2030. In 2020, due to COVID, many Earth Days switched to being online. So a 3-day live stream event took place on Earth Day, and over 1 billion people participated. I just wanted to stop here for a minute. All these acronyms that I've seen floating around, the Paris Agreement and COP 28, 27, all that. I wanted to explain all that because these really are significant developments in the history of trying to combat climate change. And it helped me to actually solidify some of my knowledge. So today, climate change will be my major focus. But another thing that's threatening the Earth is plastic production and disposal. The major challenge is due to the effect of marine life. You've probably seen photos of these huge plumes of plastic floating in the Pacific, as well as stories about the tiny microscopic plastics being viewable, being in places from the Himalayas to even the breast milk of human beings. So this is a major threat to I think, the whole world, as well as climate change. What's in common? Petroleum and the oil industry. A recent article from The Guardian states that if plastic production rates remain steady, which they're not expected to, that by 2050, plastic production would account for 15 to 19% of the world's global carbon budget. So plastic is another major problem. And then, of course, plastic can be recycled. Of course, so little of it is. It some of it is incinerated. That is when you put it in a plastic bin, some of it gets recycled, some of it gets incinerated. That incineration contributes to greenhouse gases as well. So one thing I learned a while back was the three legs of the climate change. And this is what you have to accept in order to believe that. It's the first leg is climate change happening. Fortunately, over the last 20 years or so, the consensus has grown since the days when we first began talking about global warming. Of course, some people will never admit it, and we're not going to worry about those. Is climate change caused by human? That's the second leg of the stool. Again, the consensus has been growing about this, and the continued denial by those who have challenged the above. So-called natural cycles theory is a claim foisted on us by the deniers who benefit from the oil and coal industries. And of course, the natural cycles theory is that we're just in a natural cycle. We haven't been able to measure this kind of cycle for, we've only recently been able to measure climate change. So it's just a part of the natural process, which a lot of people think, holds water, but these people don't usually read much of the newspapers. Then third leg of this stool is, can we really do anything now to change course? Unfortunately, constant warnings of disaster seem to fuel those who say it's too late to do anything meaningful. Some have taken a more liberal view, which says we must adapt to the effects of climate change without actually acknowledging that it's happened, such as doing things to protect low-lying areas of the country, shore up the shores so that the rising global ocean levels don't threaten populations. So those are the three legs of climate change. So the question is who's, in the US at least, who is doing the most, emitting the most gas? So on the left side of this picture is gas emissions by sector. So you see here, commercial and residential is in orange. It didn't, because I tried to get this narrowed down for the slide, it didn't show up. It was 13%. So again, you hear a lot about transportation, industry, and electric power. Transportation actually emits the most greenhouse gases, followed by electric power, industry, agriculture, and residential and commercial. On the right side is who actually end use, who uses gas emissions at end use. So you'll see that commercial and residential has jumped to 30%. Industry has jumped to 30% from 23. Transportation is about the same as is agriculture. So the end use people. So you see here that how it's used that's another way that contributes to gas emissions. So then when you look again further, and this is looking at the world, CO2 emissions in selected advanced economies. So it's got the United States, the European Union, and Japan. And you say the United States was by far the largest contributor during this 20-year period, 4.6 gigatons. The next slide is actually another one that is even more revealing. And this shows that during that same period, China emitted 11.9 gigatons of CO2 emissions during that same period. India was at 2.5. So India was behind the European Union, but the US was ahead of that. But of course, China eclipsed all of that. So what kind of companies are contributing to climate change? There's the CO2 emissions. Carbon Major Database, which is a database compiled by world-renowned researchers, shows that 57 major oil, gas, and coal companies and cement producers contribute 80% of the world's global fossil CO2 emissions since the 2016 Paris Agreement. The biggest investor-owned companies in this list are in order ExxonMobil, Shell, BP, Chevron, and Total Energies, which I've never heard of. ExxonMobil was in fact larger by a significant factor than the nearest Shell, but it was still, those are the major contributors. Then you also have state-owned producers such as China. Chinese coal production accounts for 14% of the historic global CO2, which is more than double the Soviet Union and 3 times that of the Saudi Aramco, which is third. So what are the current challenges we face in climate change? Well, one is what's the role of developed nations versus developing nations? You would say, well, we all should reduce our CO2 emissions, but the problem is that the developed countries are the ones who have contributed the most towards the CO2 emissions that the world is suffering from. So we have a greater responsibility, and we have the greater wealth by and large. So we have the resources to work on reducing the CO2 emissions, whereas the developed countries still need something to help them get out of the poverty, to help them get a decent standard of living for all their people. And so from what I've read, there's a lot more tolerance for some development of greenhouse fossil fuels, such as oil and gas, to be done in those countries, while they can also try to ramp up their sustainable non-CO2 emitting industries. But of course, that takes money, and the poor countries don't have money. So the poor countries need the rich countries and things like the World Bank to help finance those efforts. But because of course, the oil companies have no problem financing the efforts in these countries where they stand to profit. So we really have to find world resources to get these countries to adapt. Also, at the same time, bring in more sustainable energy sources. Let's see. Future oil and gas extraction. Global Energy Monitor, a San Francisco NGO, reported recently that the world's fossil fuel producers were on track to nearly quadruple the amount of oil and gas extracted from newly approved projects by the end of the decade. And this gets back to the third world countries I was talking about. The US led the way for projects in 22 and 23, but Guyana was second, with countries in the Americas accounting for 40% of all new oil drilling during the past 2 years. Of the 22 countries with significant oil and gas discoveries in the past 2 years, 4, Cyprus, Guyana, Namibia, and Zimbabwe, accounted for more than a third of the discoveries, despite having produced little or no gas until recently. Okay, so those are the problems. Now, what are some solutions? Well, of course, we all know about solar and wind. The IPCC estimates that globally, wind and solar can deliver more than a third of the emissions reductions needed for a 1.5-degree pathway across all sectors by 2030. Solar, wind, and power costs have been declining rapidly as well. During the decade up to 2020, the cost of solar and wind power fell by 55 to 85%. The cost of batteries increasingly used to store renewable energy also fell by 85% over that same time period. According to data from the International Renewable Energy Agency, 85% of utility scale wind and solar power was added at a cheaper cost than fossil fuel alternatives in 2022. In some cases, it's even cheaper to build and run new wind or solar farms than to continue running existing fossil fuel plants. Solar is transforming life in all areas as remote as the Amazon in Ecuador. Solar-powered boats, powering schools and homes and cell phones, and the very infrastructure of community life. And the one pictures I decided to include in this was this. And here on the left, you see a woman who is using her cell phone to communicate with somebody. On the right, you see a man sticking his head up through a solar panel array in a small village. It's not a very big one, but they're working on powering their villages with solar power. And then on the bottom right, you see a boat that's entirely powered from solar panels. So, this is transforming life in the Amazon, and this is a great, great sign that I wanted to share with you. Just this incongruity in a way of what you think of as the Amazon, and then you see that they're adapting this sustainable technology, which is wonderful. Solutions: carbon capture and renewal. Definition of carbon capture and storage involves isolating and trapping CO2 emissions where they are produced, such as at a power station, refinery, or incinerator. Captured gas can be used to make products such as synthetic fuel or fizzy drinks, or can be transported by pipeline or ship to a permanent storage site deep under the seabed. Doug Parr, chief scientist for Greenpeace UK, said carbon capture and storage was hailed by the oil industry as a miraculous silver bullet, but they had failed to deliver. Carbon capture and storage did not appear to be much closer in reducing carbon emissions or being affordable than it did 20 years ago. This scheme stands out as greenwashing. Exxon is citing its efforts at carbon capture to greenwash its public image. It is yet to get a carbon storage license for a plant in England that it also touts as an example of its efforts, nor has it committed any funds to making it happen. Other efforts, however, may pay off in the long run. Hybrid direct air capture is an example. Avnos in California is pioneering this. One site is live and another is set to deploy in 2028. And now it's a Chris throat break. Solar geoengineering. That refers to methods used to block the sun from the whole Earth or reflect it back into space for smaller geographic regions. Major volcanic eruptions have resulted in the cooling of the Earth for a few years or so, so could we do the same? The idea got a major boost in 2006 when Paul Crutzen, a Nobel Prize-winning atmospheric chemist, published an article in Climate Change. It involves spraying of sulfuric acid and other particles into the atmosphere to deflect sunlight. The redirection of just 3% of the sun would reap benefits, and the estimated cost would be 20 billion. The idea was first floated actually in 1965 in a report to President Johnson. At best, it could be a way of delaying the inevitable for a couple of years. Yet a couple of years may not provide enough relief as the world continues to warm. There's also adverse risk potential for some people who may not benefit from this. It may benefit the whole, but not everyone. So this is a question mark in my mind. Then there's geothermal energy. Amanda Kolker of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory recently stated that geothermal energy is entering the renewable energy spectrum as a base load, which could provide energy when wind and solar dips due to current climate conditions. The U.S. Department of Energy estimates that geothermal could provide 10% of our energy by 2050. New technologies funded by the Biden administration can also help provide contenders for a larger scale use. The major issue with geothermal extraction is that it will use the same techniques as fracking and horizontal drilling in addition to deep earth drilling. And those of you who live in the area know that fracking has not particularly been popular among environmentalists in this area, although some people have argued fracking has enabled the U.S. to become one of the leading oil producers in the world, which I guess depending on how you look at it is good or bad. We certainly need to work more towards green, sustainable energy. Nuclear energy. Okay. Smaller nuclear energy plants are being viewed as a possible contributor to our energy demands. They're about a fourth the size and capacity of a traditional 1,200 megawatt nuclear power plant. They can be made in factories and shipped, yes, shipped on the highway. They use different fuel technology than traditional nuclear energy plants, such as uranium encased in graphite spheres, which also trap the waste. Of course, they don't say what they do with those spheres when they're used. They also use other technologies to cool the reactor, such as helium gas, which does not carry a radioactive waste if it is released. Water, which is the traditional cooling method for nuclear power plants, does carry along radioactive waste when it's released. Another solution. We learned about this actually last week in our program, and I wanted to give homage to what she said. Slowing population growth through rights-based measures such as increasing access to quality reproductive health care will reduce emissions that cause climate change and decrease the number of climate victims. So according to Population Action International, the the demographic trends have an important connection to both the challenges and solution of climate change. Rapid population growth exacerbates vulnerability um, to the negative consequences of climate change and exposes growing numbers of people to climate risk. Population growth is also one of the drivers in greenhouse gases and contributes to climate change. Meeting people's needs for family planning and reproductive health builds resilience in climate change impacts. Meeting family planning needs will also stem the population growth, easing challenges associated with climate change impacts and reducing the growth of greenhouse gas emissions. Unfortunately, I think that she pointed out last week, the funding for family planning is not as what it should be. So we need to lobby for the U.S. to contribute more to that and do whatever we can to fund it. So future challenges. Okay. AI computing and crypto technology currencies are ramping up energy demands in the US and worldwide. It's estimated that Bitcoin consumes the electricity at an annualized rate of 127 terawatt hours. The usage exceeds the entire electricity consumption, annual electricity consumption of Norway. Alex de Vries, a data scientist at the Central Bank of the Netherlands, recently stated that if AI-powered all Google searches, it requires as much power as Ireland just to run the search engine. Precious earth minerals. Is there enough to have for all electric cars and replace combustion engines? What about the problem of child labor being used to extract these rare earth resources? That's a problem. Another future challenge is indoor farming, which you would think, oh, that's great. We have less arable land, so we can have indoor farming, but yet that uses a ton of cooling to ensure that the crops grow in a friendly environment. So they're not really useful where water is scarce. So what can we do as individuals? Well, we can try being a vegetarian, going vegan, or flexitarian, which I guess is some combination of the two. Beef is a major contributor to CO2 emissions, and pork contributes a lot to the polluting of our waterways with these huge hog farms. Plus, it also emits methane. Two, vote for candidates who will do more to address climate change up and down the ballot. Government has a central role in fighting climate change. In fact, one point that I want to stop here and make, a few years ago, the oil industry, fossil fuel industries began promoting that you and me need to do things to fight climate change. And that was to deflect attention away from them and what they're doing. So, a lot of people say, well, you need to do less, you need to do this, you need to do that. Well, we can do a lot, but the government has to play a central role in fighting climate change. So, okay, what we buy. I'm glad to see more electric and hybrid cars on the roads. Solar panels on homes. That's another way to do it. Plastics at the grocery store, buy fewer plastics. But that's not easy. I've tried doing that. Almost everything you buy, well, you can find alternatives. For example, just one quick one. I don't know how long I've been going. Oh, this is good. Your detergent for your laundry, everything is encased in plastic. Your detergent for the dishwasher as well. Cascade is still making detergent that's a powder detergent, and it's in a box that's much more easily biodegradable than anything else. And my wife Jane has found these sheets you can put in your washer that replace the big, huge plastic. But if you just look down the grocery aisle where they have, it's just disgusting. And so, and then if you go to buy meats, even if you buy, I like buying Impossible meat, but what is it encased in? It's encased in plastic, So anyway, we can reduce it. We can't eliminate it. Local farmers markets support farmers, which help reduce transportation costs for food, as well as supporting farming and sustainable livestock practices. Supporting organizations like the Southern Environmental Law Center, Greenpeace, etc., with your dollars. and become a sustaining donor if you can. And most of all, don't fall into doom scrolling. Read a variety of news outlets to get a broader view of what's taking place. The Guardian, I say, has excellent stories about climate change and energy, and it's not all the negative side. They tell you, the bad news, and they tell you the good news. So I think that's one of the best sources I found for information on climate change. Apple News also has a wide variety of news about the climate and the environment. So I also recommend that to those of you who wish to purchase it. So my last thoughts are from Penn State University meteorology professor Michael Mann. He said in a response to a New York Magazine article, the evidence that climate change is a serious problem that we must confront now is overwhelming on its own. There is no need to overstate the evidence, particularly when it feeds a paralyzing narrative of doom and hopelessness. The fact of the matter is that the planet isn't going to explode like a balloon over a lighter. There won't be a doomsday event where everything just stops. We need to prepare for the actual future, which is arguably darker than an instantaneous extinction. Most likely, even if we don't mitigate climate change, the world won't stop existing. Instead, the people and animals on it will face horrifying consequences. So that doesn't sound good, but you just got to remember, if you go around thinking that there's nothing you can do, then truly nothing good will happen. So, from everything that you buy to who you vote for, to even talking to your friends, all of these things can have an impact. But as I said, government has to be involved in fixing this. So I will stop there and turn it over for Q&A. I can do this. We receive no money from any other entity. We don't receive money from the IPCC, from the Democratic Party, from communists, or anybody. We support due to your diligent giving and pledging. So thank you as we pass around the baskets and for your donations. Thank you very much. So, go ahead.
Also, there are some rules about questions and comments. Please ask your question or give your opinion or a comment, make it brief. And we will go around. Once everyone is done, we will come back for the second one.
All right. Oh, I also wanted to show you, in researching this, I have a list of references. So that's page 1 of the references, page 2, page 3. I think that's it. All right. So you are free to go and research this. And I'll send the slides out as well to everybody. So.
Concerning plastics, I'm a microbiologist, and I have the conviction that microorganisms can do anything. And I was really excited a few years back to see an article in Science magazine that had some information about an organism isolated in Japan that is called, if I recall, Ideonella sakiensis, and it was isolated in the town of Sakai in Japan by some scientists there, and they found it chewing away on PET plastic bottles and degrading the plastic rather efficiently. I haven't seen a lot about it recently, so I don't know if that technology has gone forward, but I suspect that if indeed that pans out, there are biological technical solutions to the ocean of plastic, so to speak, that we find ourselves in. How effectively and efficiently they can be used, I don't know, but that's my comment.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
All right, we'll go for Amy and then Solomon.
A couple of months ago, I heard a report on the energy use of the cryptocurrency industry. And that was really disturbing. I think they're able to continue because they're virtually unregulated. And the thing that will help that a lot is to start regulating the cryptocurrency industry and to investigate more thoroughly the money laundering that's going on there. So that's one way to get them out of business
Yeah,
for
yeah.
many good reasons.
Yeah, because you may think Bitcoin has a lot of advantages. That's one disadvantage that I have no desire to invest in something like that because of its and plus in AI too. You know what's going to happen with that? It looks like everybody's ramping up to use it, but yet it uses a lot of power. So
Just briefly before I forget, Solomon, I'm stealing your spot for a second. I was actually talking to my brother, he's been a computer person for decades upon decades. And he pointed out one thing with these large companies like Google is that a lot of them do have very large solar farms. So at least they're doing some balancing
Yeah.
effects.
yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, my question was more on if you had any thoughts, as has been pointed out, there are ways to mitigate this with organic foods, more environmentally friendly objects to buy, things like that. But an opinion on the expense, as many of us know, to try to live this way is more expensive.
Right.
And wondered if you had any opinions on that.
Well, we can only do, what we can afford to do. I'm certainly not going to, you know, I'll tell you one thing I've thought about, but I don't really want to do it because we're talking about several $1,000s. About 8 or 9 years ago, we replaced our gas heating system because the old one had died and it was time to replace it. I thought of getting a heat pump, but a heat pump can be very inefficient. In fact, I have 2 heating systems in my home. I have one that's heated in the winter by the gas, and the other is a heat pump. And just for that side of the house, sometimes I'll pay as much as over $350 for electricity, as opposed to maybe about $150 during the normal months. So if I were to take out that gas and put in a heat pump, it could cost me way more on an annual basis than and gas is pretty cheap right now. So what do? That's a quandary. We all have those quandaries, and you just have to do what you feel like you can afford to do. We all have to balance our needs against that of the larger community. And there's nothing wrong with choosing, I can't afford to do this, or I choose not to do it for whatever reason, but I'll make other efforts to make change. We just do the best we can do. I would not morally shun anybody for not doing something that I can do, because I can afford things other people can't afford. And I did talk to someone about putting solar on our house, and they examined our house from above, and they said, you'd have to cut down almost all of your trees. They said that wouldn't pay for itself. Don't do that. So, yeah.
I'm just going to comment that another class of chemicals that you probably are going to be hearing more and more about are, they're called PFAS,
Yeah.
the perfluoroalkyl substances, or in the popular press, they're called forever chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
And they are like, the most common PFAS is Teflon and Teflon type molecules. They're variations of this sort of tetrafluoroethylene type, Teflon, Kevlar, all those things. And they are almost impossible to get rid of. Some technology is coming online, we're still in the development phase of breaking down the PFAS in the water and in the ground, but that's a long way again. Another very common source, it's not a huge thing, but we don't think about it, is this.
Yeah.
The HFA. MDIs, the HFA. That's a PFAS. But the medical PFAS usage is actually a small section of PFAS use when you compare it to automobiles and electronics and defense and things like that.
One thing I wanted to point out too, I read recently that recycling electronic components, if you make sure you throw out take your electronic components and put them in the proper bin, that more and more people are looking at recycling the precious earth metals, rare earth minerals from those things. And there could potentially be quite a significant, although they didn't say how much, contribution from that recycling to the minerals needed for new solar cells, batteries, what have you. So that's a promising. Yes. Anybody else?
Gordon and then John.
Thank you. I have two questions. One is, what do I do with my AA batteries that are used, which my mouse and my keyboard use? So I have a steady stream of 50% used batteries out of my house. How do I dispose of them? And that's one question. Another one is, Bitcoin energy baffles me. I wonder if you're going to post this references page online so that we can use these hyperlinks.
Yeah.
Because it looks like that is explained. Bitcoin energy is explained by Forbes in the,
Yeah.
I'll get a clearer understanding, because it seems to me that Bitcoin energy electric usage is amplified because by Bitcoin holders, not by the Bitcoin exchange itself, because Bitcoin holders generally will have more money to spend, and so they have a greater electrical expense.
Yeah. Agreed with Bitcoin. I will post this out to the
Thank you.
email group, and maybe I can talk to Dorothy about getting it on the MailChimp. In terms of batteries, I put my in a separate little compartment next to my recycling stuff. And then I know the Chatham County Waste Disposal, they have a place where you can take the batteries and they dump them into another container, and then something's done with them. I'm pretty sure they don't go into the landfill. I think you're referring to AA batteries. Yeah. Oh, I would think Orange County would. I'd be surprised if they do.
They do. They will take your batteries. They will take your batteries.
Hey, Chris, could you repeat that for the Zoom audience?
Repeat what?
Oh.
Oh, Solomon. He said, yes, Orange County does recycle batteries. So you just have to go to an Orange County Recycling Center and drop them off there.
Okay. Chris, somewhere a little further back, you mentioned something about special metals or rare earths or something like that. How does that play in? Does that have something to do with the production of batteries or what?
Yeah, batteries. Yeah, rare earth minerals are needed for batteries.
Could you elaborate
so-
on that?
And well,
Could you exactly how does that play in?
well,
You need them for?
there's places where these rare earth minerals are available, but they have to be dug out, as opposed, and from what I've seen, I see more pictures of young people in holes that have been dug by hand digging out them than I do industrial size, graders and things like that. It's not like the coal industry. It's more like they have to dig and look for specific veins of it. Some countries have a lot of it. By a lot, I don't know if that means they could power the whole world for 5 years. But I've read a lot of criticism about the extraction of rare earth minerals and the use of labor and whatever other CO2 emitting devices they use to mine that. So there is a limited amount, but when we're going to hit that threshold where we run out, hopefully the recycling efforts I just mentioned will be enough to replace it. And they're also looking at recycling used car batteries, for example. So rather than the car battery sort of getting thrown into whatever dump they put it in, people how to revitalize those. So if you're an optimist, you can say some of these things will take care of themselves, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be concerned. So, Stevie Jane has her hand up. Oh, hold on.
Wait. Zoom mic, very important.
Okay. Which, which location in Chatham County is it that you bring the old batteries?
I take it, any of the major disposal units will take them. So up in North Chatham, I go there to the recycling center, near Cole Park. You live closer to Pittsburgh, so you could also take it down to the county landfill has a place there where they take, things like batteries as well, so.
Since I don't see any hands up, I'm going to steal the mic again. I was actually, I want to go back to the grocery store for a minute.
Yeah.
Because it is true, there are an awful lot of things that are very hard to buy, not in plastic. But my question for you is, with your different plastics, do you recycle any of them or do you mostly throw them away in case they're going to get burned somewhere?
That's a good, we used to try and recycle everything, and my wife Jane was very diligent about helping me do that. When I read that a lot of plastic, the Guardian has really put out information about plastic recycling. And when I learned that a lot of stuff ends up being incinerated or floating around somewhere, I think, well, why is that happening? But one of the problems with recycling, plastic recycling, is that it's cheaper to produce new plastic than it is to recycle it. And so, you really need a government incentive there to put a tax on new plastic that would help with that. Say your question again, because I think I missed part of it.
My question for you is actually a personal thing, which is, if you're looking at your
Oh.
plastics at home that you've purchased and that are now empty, do you toss them in the trash? Do you try to
Okay.
recycle them? What do you do with them?
In Farrington, where I live, we pay, Farrington pays an independent contractor to come and pick up trash and recycling. But believe it or not, they don't recycle the same things that the county recycles. The county recycles way more than this operation does. And they have different standards so for example, the private company that we hire, only takes like the most common plastics, like ones and twos. But the county will take 5 and 6s and others that I didn't expect they would take. So I'm now having two places where I segregate plastic and other recyclables. So I now take the recyclables that the plastic recyclables the county will do, take to the county. And what's interesting about that is that they say the tops must be on these things in order for them to be truly recyclable. Well, if you go to the county facility, you throw all this stuff in a huge thing and it crushes it, to make more room. So I said, well, don't these things, and I actually emailed the people in Pittsburgh to ask this question, doesn't this just destroy whatever plastic you're trying to, why put the top on it at all? And they said some of it does get crushed and ruined, but a lot of it with a good fitting top will still have the top on it even after it gets crushed. So, who knows how much that the county actually takes ends up getting recycled and how much and burned, because of the stuff that gets recycled, they still may take recycled, they still may take it and incinerate it when they have more plastic than they can process. So that is than is available on the market, or goodness, and someone's got to take this plastic and do something with it. So anyway, that's what I'm doing now. It's really good to go to your county waste management site and see what plastics they take and under what conditions they take. In fact, with Coke bottles, I used to think, you would rinse them out and just throw them in there. But actually, if you read the top of the Coke bottles, it says recycle with top on. So, that's something else to, read every little thing. You got to look for some of this information. It's really sort of crazy.
Recently, I think I read something somewhere about different types of nuclear technology, other than, well, of course, we've heard a lot recently about fusion reactors versus fission reactors. But did you come across any in your, I see small nuclear energy reactors up there, information about thorium reactors or some of the other technologies that
I
people
know
are
that fusion
looking at?
reacting, they're making progress with that. I think they finally were able to do a fusion experiment where they produced more energy than they consumed, but that's still years away from being fruitful.
You're talking about breeder reactors. And you started using thorium. And what happens is that once it goes through a cycle, it produces another fissile material. That produces another fissile
Wow.
material. That's why it's called a breeder reactor. But now work is still continuing using some, they're calling it salt reactors. I think they're using salt of uranium or thorium or something like that to do that. It's a hard thing to do. Nobody has perfected that technology as yet. But can I just say something? When I first came to the United States in 81, there was a program which Jimmy Carter had started,
Mhm.
which was developing nuclear reactors for power using low-grade uranium, which would be almost impossible except for maybe those days, United States and Soviet Union, maybe UK and France, to actually enrich to weapons grade. Because these days, they're either using weapons grade or they're using near weapons grade. But Reagan killed the program. So
No,
Oh,
okay.
Todd?
Oh.
I read quite a while back about different nuclear options, and thorium was in there, and maybe it was thorium or some other kind of technology where there was no danger of it going out of, getting out of control and burning through the floor and spreading radioactivity. And it was a much safer thing. And it was, again, rejected, I think, by the Reagan administration. There was some decision made that, no, we're going to go with this type. And I'm wondering if that's, been resurrected, or is, a possibility to take a lot of the danger out of nuclear reactors.
I don't know, these small,
different types of options that you can get.
oh,
Sorry.
sure.
Any work on nuclear technology has become very unpopular with the Greens. Though that actually some of these technologies you're talking about are better options. But there's now just dumping. I mean, I remember in Ronald Reagan's time, they dug huge caverns in Nevada and started dumping nuclear waste encased in cement. Well, what happened? Cement's cracked and everything got out and contaminated the groundwater anyway. So to me, the best option is actually thermonuclear.
What is thermonuclear?
Okay, nuclear one is fission, that is, you break the atom. Thermonuclear is fusion, that you take two atoms, usually tritium, and fuse it. Okay, from helium of I think helium-3 or something.
Oops, hold it. That's all right. All right. Anybody, one thing I wanted to say, I may have skipped one of these slides. While China has been contributing so much to CO2, they're also building a huge amount of solar panels and putting this out there in their country. So it looks like they are trying to make an energy transition. One of the things that you have to do in order to have energy that's plentiful is to have an energy grid that works. And you need an energy infrastructure. You need transmission lines, high-speed transmission lines that can take it from areas of the country that have an abundance to areas that need power. And of course, in an emergency, you'd need to help siphon some away from everybody so that the people who needed it could get it. And China has been doing this incredibly well from what I've read. So China's not all bad. They're doing some good stuff. In the US, transmission lines are a real problem because a lot of the power companies are owned by private individuals. So how do you make, that's a place where the government and private partnerships have to form to make it work. So that's another. Texas, for example, was one of the few states, in fact, is the only state in the union that never signed on to the national energy network because Texans are Texans. And so when they recently had some of their power outages, they had nowhere to draw from to get power from any other state. So that's starting to change. But, with Texas, I'm not making any bets. Sorry, Texans, if you're in the audience or.
You said something about, I probably didn't catch the whole thing, about water taking in the contaminants. And when you release the water, it releases the contaminants. What's going on like at the Sharon Harris plant near Jordan Lake? Like, are they releasing radioactive water?
No, no,
into
they,
the
the water's not released unless there's some type of accident. So,
So if they were to have to release
yeah,
it.
so if there were, if there was a huge crack and water came flooding out of the reactor, that water would be contaminated. Fukuyama, I think, was an example of that, where the earthquake ended up causing the containment centers to crack, and then the radioactive waste water leaked out into the ocean, and they're even trying to still remove that, or if they're not removing it from the ocean, they're still trying to capture all of that water that was released.
Is
and do
there a
something
way
with it.
to capture, like, let's say they had a disaster and the water got released. Is there a way to capture the water?
That I don't know.
No.
All right. We might need to wrap this up after your comment.
Yeah, briefly, I lived in Holly Springs years ago, and at one point we were all given iodine pills, which is because radioactive iodine will accumulate and cause cancer. But if you take the iodine pill, it competes and flushes it out of your system, basically. So, and that was in case of a disaster at the Harris plant, and radioactivity was released into the air. But yeah, so they do think about it. So if you happen to live in Holly Springs, keep some iodine handy.
Oh, I mean,
Holly Springs isn't alone. It affects all of us. In fact, when you drive in certain places in Chapel Hill, you can see the vapor coming from Sharon Harris. So it's and if it won't just be in Holly Springs, it'll be everywhere. So let's hope they have good safety measures in place.
yeah. So did you say you would wrap it up?
You get the last word, Chris, as our speaker.
All right. Well, thank all of you all for your rapt attention today and your questions. And let's try not to get too depressed about what's happening. It's going to be a balance or some combination of good news and bad news. And I just say, try to keep your chin up a little bit and do all you can, from voting to contributing to these organizations to what you buy. Keep all that in your head and then consider your pocketbook. Thanks. No, no solute green, sorry.
No, I don't need. Jay, you're up. Closing words. Huh? Announcements? Well, it doesn't have to be before the closing words. I mean, are we that stick in the mud that's unless we do
Yes,
that,
we're
we-
very
we
stick in
will
the
not
mud.
survive?
So that we won't forget things like the
Okay,
fact
go
that
ahead with
next
the
week,
announcements. Please go ahead.
it's same bat time, same bat channel. We're meeting in person and we have a visiting speaker. How does Jim say his last name? Is it Bowie?
Yeah.
Jim Bowie, and his title is the U.S. headed for civil war or just a political shift? This is a talk that he was supposed to give earlier, but he had a family emergency and unfortunately could not give it. So we're really looking forward to seeing him. As many people who can come in person would be great, because he's a visiting speaker.
And this Wednesday will be our Humanist Happy Hour. And we're going to try the Doherty's restaurant once again in Pittsburgh. It's a very popular place, and I will try to make a reservation the day before. So you must let me know if you're coming, so I know how big a table to reserve. We had 12 people last month, and so we need to have that in advance because, like I said, they're very popular. But let me know.
Thank you, Gretchen.
Quick announcements. So of course, our Change for Change organization is the Wake County Medical Society Community Health Foundation. Thank you. They are now going under the name Right Care. So they provide services to uninsured patients as well as those who need a primary care home through Project Access, which is a state program. And this is an organization found through Charity Navigator. So we're supporting them for the work that they are doing as a nonprofit organization providing care. And also just a reminder, I know it's super early, 5/19, May 19th, Rise Against Hunger. We are going to be there instead of here. So just wanted to keep planting that seed. Thank you.
If you go, give a strip show.
There you go. Okay.
Don't keep it on. Put on more. So I couldn't find anything humorous about plastic pollutants, but in my search for things about plastic, I came across some entertaining little quips. One was by the Who's Pete Townsend, who said, "I was born with a plastic spoon in my mouth." And Groucho Marx once said about a very attractive woman, "She got her good looks from her father. He's a plastic surgeon." And that, of course, led me to the topic of plastic surgery. And a famous comedian, Joan Rivers, had a whole stick about her own plastic surgery. So here are three of the things that she once said. Quote, "I saw what's going on under my chin. I don't want to be the one the president has to pardon on Thanksgiving." She also said, and this is a little more on topic, Chris, the serious side of plastics. Joan Rivers said, "If they bury me and dig me up, they'll discover I'm absolutely not biodegradable or non-recyclable." And the final thing she remarked along those same lines was, "I've had so much plastic surgery. When I die, they can donate my body to Tupperware." Thanks.
Blade Runner, anyone remember that? Yeah, there's a post environmental apocalypse. So it's still one of my favorite science fiction movies. Anyway, our meeting has ended and our fellowship continues. So give the person next to you a hug or however way you want to greet them. And please, and Solomon has been guarding the food very. So, thank you.